Wow. Welcome. Welcome to today's live immersive exploration. My name's Sudha Ketapal. I'm your compere for today. And having been in the live music industry for over 30 years, I'm intrigued, as I'm sure you are, at what today is going to bring. So firstly, I'd like to start by saying a huge thank you to you, to all of you on the live stream, to our sponsors, Bowers and Wilkins, and our amazing hosts, Metropolis. We're here right now. Absolutely amazing. Why are we here, though? Why are we here? Well, what we're presenting today are keynotes, 2 in-depth panels, and they've been designed for 3 reasons. Firstly, to give you practical information. Secondly, to educate any labels here today or on the live stream. And lastly, to answer questions. I'm sure you've all got questions. I've got questions. There's so much that we need to find out, and we're in the right place to do it today. Today, we are joined by some brilliant experts, amazing experts. Some of you are already sitting in the audience. Can't wait to get you up here and to hear from you. And basically the idea is for us all to get a balanced view, really good insight into what immersive audio actually is. And is Gavin in the crowd here? Yeah, there's Gavin. We've got amazing Gavin from Metropolis Studios, and he's kindly offered to bespoke you a tour so you can get involved, get immersive. He'll give you all the information that you need, and he's here to help you as our Metropolis, so it's absolutely great. Without further ado, it's time to introduce our first guest speaker. He is basically Mike Hillier from Metropolis, and Mike is going to educate us. He's going to give us a bit of that educational piece. So some of the things that you might be wondering are, what do we mean? What is it? Anyway, what is immersive audio? What do we mean by it? Can we have that question answered? Do we know the different brands? Do we know the different terminology? Now's our time to get educated. And essentially, what actually do we need to know? Everyone, please put your hands together for Mike Hillier.
Yeah, so immersive audio. Hopefully, you've all turned up to this event, so you've got a faint idea of what it is. But basically, what we're talking about when we're talking about immersive audio is the next step in moving away from stereo in a different direction. It's a paradigm shift from multi-channel surround sound formats. So we've seen in the past 5.1, you might have seen 7.1 and other multi-channel formats. Immersive audio is different. It does things in a very different way. And the big thing, what it does is it uses things that are called objects instead of channels as the fundamental element in the format. So what is an object? If an object is what makes immersive different, what is it? Essentially, if you can think back to big analog consoles or your DAW, you have a channel. And on each channel, you might have a sound source. So maybe if you're doing a basic, let's just strip it down. Let's say like a folk thing where you've got 2 channels. You might have a singer and a guitar, and they'll be on individual things. Now on a multi-channel format, such as stereo, you would then mix those and pan those to locations in the stereo field. And the deliverable file has those elements mixed together, combined, probably, in those 2 channels. In immersive audio, we leave those 2 channels as individual objects. And what that allows us to do is we have the vocal as one object, and that can have a coordinate in space, and the guitar will have a coordinate in space. And if we just simplify it, so we're just talking in stereo for now, and we're just placing these things in a stereo field, you can manipulate those 2 items separately all the way through, and they remain separate all the way through to the final file. And when you kind of explode that out into a 3-dimensional space and away from stereo, you get a lot more freedom. And what happens is, rather than a sound where it moves existing in an individual speaker. So in 5.1, you'd have your rear speaker as that's a channel of audio, your front left speaker, that's a channel of audio, your rear right speaker, that's a channel of audio. So as something moves from the rear left to the front left, it pans and the volume decreases in the rear left and increases in the front left. And that's the final file. That's how it's delivered. And once you've got lots of elements within that, it's very hard to strip those out. And let's say you want to move that thing from now from a 5.1 to a 7.1 system, and you add an extra speaker in between. With multi-channel, you can't really. You just end up with an extra speaker doing nothing, because as it moves between those two things. With immersive, because it's an object and that sound has a coordinate in space, as it moves from the rear to the front, it passes through that new speaker and it can come out of that new speaker, which means immersive audio doesn't care how many speakers you've got. And that's the first, I would say, really important invention or feature of immersive audio, is that it's agnostic to your speaker setup. It will work with a stereo speaker setup. It will work with a 5.1 setup, a 7.1 setup. And if you, hopefully you will all experience it later on when you go to our Atmos room here, an 11.1.8 speaker setup, which is 20 speakers. You know, you can just, it just magically works because it's a coordinate, and it just says, the system asks, what's the nearest 3 speakers to this? I'm going to triangulate what my sound should be, and I'll just make it come out of those. And so that makes it future-proof. Any future technologies can just come along and say, oh, I've added some new speakers and they exist like this. Well, okay, my mix has a coordinate, so I don't care. I'll just make it work. So that's the first kind of fundamental element of immersive audio. You are using objects and not channels for your final deliverable. Now, a disadvantage perhaps is that your file sizes are going to get massive very quickly. With 5.1 audio, you have a known quantity, 6 channels of audio. With immersive, you could have 100 quite easily, and that will just play back on a 5.1 system, but it will be, 30 times bigger as a file. So that's the disadvantage. That's why it's happening now rather than maybe a long time ago. Immersive audio was developed around the 70s with ambisonics, but now we've got streaming. Big file size is no longer really that much of a big deal. So these servers can host it and they stream to you at the end user, whatever you need. If you need the 5.1, you stream the 6 channels to your system. If you need a 7.1, you stream 8 channels to your system. And so the amount of data used is dependent on what you're pulling off the system. The other really interesting element of immersive audio is when it comes to headphones. So I'm going to get a little bit technical, and I'll try not to get too far into the maths or the acronyms, but there's something called binaural, which we have done recordings with for a long, long time, where you get essentially 2 microphones spaced the same distance apart as your ears. Now, remember, you only have 2 ears. So to capture what your 2 ears hear, you only need 2 recordings, one for the left and one for the right. But they need to be spaced the same distance as your ears. And we do this regularly with things called dummy heads. And that's great. You can get a binaural recording. But that binaural recording will only play back in a meaningful way on headphones. The minute you play it out through speakers, it sounds a bit weird. So with immersive audio, we can, with some clever maths, kind of put our objects through this convolution, this clever maths, and come out as binaural, which means that any immersive mix, as well as working on stereo and 5.1 and 7.1, will also work on headphones and will reproduce the sound in the way that you hear it. And what I mean there is different is that when you have something in the left speaker on a normal headphone mix, it's only coming out of the left and there's nothing coming out of the right. That's how we move things in stereo. We pan to the left with positioning by changing the volume across the 2 headphones. In binaural, we pan things by not only changing the volume between the 2, but also changing the time domain. So I sound, as I'm talking to you now, you're all hopefully staring right at me intently. It's arriving at both of your ears at the same time. But if something really interesting happened over on that wall, you'd all turn to your right, the sound would hit your left ear before it hits your right ear, but it would still hit your right ear. It will hit your right ear a number of milliseconds later. It will hit your right ear slightly filtered. You'll have lost a little bit of high end as it passes through your head. All of this is what I mean when I'm saying clever maths. This is all captured, which allows you to get the same result as if you've got loads and loads of speakers, but just with a standard pair of headphones. It's really important to note when I say standard headphones, you don't need anything special. You don't need, Apple AirPods or whatever. Any pair of headphones you already own works. And that's why the binaural bit is really interesting, because you all presumably have headphones. You all presumably have a smartphone. So that means you've got all of the tech required already, probably in your pocket right now, to play immersive audio songs. You don't need to go out and invest in 20 speakers to put around your bedroom or your living room or wherever you want to listen. You just need a pair of headphones and a smartphone, and you can experience it straight away.
Well, hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Rasika D'Souza. I'm the principal analyst for personal electronic devices at Future Source Consulting. And I'm actually just here to take 10 minutes of your time to just tell you a little bit about, the growing trends in immersive audio and spatial audio, and really what consumers are, saying about this technology and what the industry is really talking about. My background is in hardware. So, a lot of the trends I'm going to be telling you about is, what the hardware industry is doing in order to kind of get this technology into the hands of the consumers. So to begin with, is spatial audio the next big thing? That's the big question. As we've just heard, it's not a new technology. It has been in consumer homes for a few years now. And the use cases have typically, been around video and video-based entertainment, where, as we all know, Dolby Atmos has a very strong foothold. But when the pandemic hit the world in 2020, consumers started becoming more homebound, and they obviously wanted to improve their lives even whilst being at home. And they started investing in better audio technology and generally wanted better sound. Now, this was not just for video entertainment, but the use cases expanded beyond that. So, whether it's music or gaming or even potentially to work from home. So, but as we see now, the pandemic hopefully is behind us, and consumers have started getting out and about. But what has not changed is that consumers they've gotten used to that good quality sound, and they don't want that to be in the house. They want to take it where they go. And what has happened is this concept of spatial audio and immersive sound, they want to take it on the go, but it's also coming in cars. And I was having some discussions with a few people earlier on today as well. And yes, Apple has had a big, impact. When they introduce spatial audio, they have really created that noise in the industry. And we are seeing that it is really having a positive impact with headphones specifically. But as I said, this trend is also gaining a lot of traction in cars. Now, obviously, in-home video entertainment is big. And, it has a clear use case for immersive sound. But we believe that on the go, music is going to be an important driver in the future for consumers to experience this technology and this experience. Now, music has become such an important aspect of our lives, and especially streaming music, that's kind of become the primary mode in which we listen to audio these days. Whilst compressed audio has always kind of been the norm, since the era of streaming music, what we're seeing is that consumers are now looking for better audio, even with streaming services. And, we do this consumer study every year. It's called Audio Tech Lifestyle, and we do it with 10,000 respondents. So 2,000
per country. And we cover 5 countries, so USA, UK, Germany, China, and Japan. And we asked respondents if they have ever listened to music or movies in spatial audio. And as you can see, 53% of consumers have said that they have listened to and experienced spatial audio, either in movies or music or both. And when we kind of further probe the respondents to ask which medium they've experienced the content in, a large proportion of them said that they have experienced this on video or music streaming services. And within music streaming, Apple tends to, kind of come up as the top streaming service where they have experienced this technology. Now, when you look at that in terms of actual, subscribers, global subscribers, Apple Music and Amazon Music together have, over 110 million global subscribers. Now that's huge. That just shows the reach that immersive audio can have, potentially. And the kind of the good thing is that Apple and Amazon are offering this technology and this immersive experience to consumers at no extra cost. So, that means more consumers are willing to and are able to hear music and spatial sound. The only limiting factor, though, is obviously the catalog of songs which support immersive spatial technology is limited and smaller in comparison to, the millions of songs that are already out there on these streaming services. But, as we say, these are positive steps towards, bringing this technology in the hands of consumers. I just want to touch a little bit upon the hardware side of things. And, our research has shown that audio hardware is actually going to drive spatial audio uptake and create that awareness and education for consumers. The true wireless revolution that we've seen, there's been so much growth and so much talk about this particular form factor, but that we believe will be an important driver to, kind of grow this technology and grow this, in the hands of consumers. Basically, what is it that an end consumer wants? We want a technology that just works out of the box. It shouldn't be complicated. Now, Apple has successfully done that. They have put this technology into their AirPods, and consumers have been able to enjoy this, and they're starting to, gain awareness and start realizing that, well, this is good quality music and this is good sound. And as we can see, as of today, 39% of true wireless earbuds have this technology, and it's predominantly Apple, but we can also see brands like Sony, Samsung, and Beats who have products with this technology. Sony, of course, uses its own proprietary 360 audio technology, but we do have other brands as well who support some of the other immersive audio technologies. Now, looking at gaming. So gaming headsets, we've seen 15% of headsets have this technology. And again, gaming has become a very serious alternative that consumers consider when they're talking about entertainment. And what we are seeing is that gaming is making huge strides in terms of these 3D audio experiences. So we definitely see a lot of potential in this specific hardware and form factor as well. And of course, soundbars, they've been in homes now for a few years, and it's probably one of the first few devices where we saw Dolby Atmos and 3D audio generally, have its presence. And at the moment, we're seeing 18% of soundbars have this technology, but within the next 5 years, we're expecting that over half of the soundbars will have this technology built in. Now, we're all also obviously thinking about the cost of living crisis that's happening in the short term. And, all of that is going to have an impact on the market. But generally, the long-term trajectory for these, products and these audio devices is positive. And with that, the penetration of spatial audio in homes or in the hands of consumers will also keep growing. Now, why do we think, that, this penetration will grow? Because audio quality is important to consumers, as I said right at the start. We've got some more research that we did with our consumer survey. And what we did is, for the respondents who have listened to music in spatial audio, we asked them how often they're listening to it. And what we saw is that over a third of the consumers said they listen to it regularly or often, which clearly shows that there is an interest and there is a growing understanding where consumers are able to, understand the difference between, the immersive sound versus just, simple MP3 or stereo sound or, whatever other formats are out there. In terms of devices, we've seen that wireless speakers and headphones kind of top the ranks in terms of the devices through which consumers have experienced this. Soundbars and home theater actually, are a bit lower in the, in numbers, potentially because of the direct link to just movies. Soundbars and home theaters used mostly when you watch movies, whereas headphones and wireless speakers, the appeal is a bit wider with music. And more importantly, we try to kind of understand what are the key aspects that consumers consider when they want to purchase future audio products. And we noticed that 40% of respondents said that it is important that audio products support spatial audio. And this is higher when you look at millennials who are between the age group of 26 to 40 years of age. Now, that kind of makes sense as well, because they are the consumers who will be able to afford these technologies, which we're not expecting will be in the really, entry-level products. It is going to obviously command a premium. And that's where we feel that the millennials are the ones who will be able to afford it and will probably appreciate this technology much more. Stepping away from the home and, personal electronics, obviously, consumers today are also demanding or wanting good quality sound systems in their cars. Now, cars are also becoming more sophisticated. There's, they're becoming quieter. There's noise canceling technology, soundproofing. Also, there's a lot of these driving aids in the form of adaptive cruise control or semi-autonomous cars. What this does is it basically makes it easier for the driver, and the driver can be in a more relaxed environment and immersive, and they can actually start to enjoy music in a more immersive manner as well. Now, linked to that, we've seen a very recent announcement from Apple. It was probably just a couple of weeks ago, where Apple and Mercedes announced Dolby Atmos in-car experiences with Apple Music. Now, that's a big breakthrough. And again, Apple is behind this. So we're hoping there would be a bit more, momentum from this space. But what we've also seen with end consumers is, again, we did some study and we noticed that, when consumers are looking to purchase their next car, they want superior sound quality, good quality audio systems. And even 16% of them have said they want Dolby Atmos. So it is quite interesting to see how consumers are starting to, want these technologies in the car as well, on themselves and in the home. So it is generally, a good space. And, this technology specifically is also easier to demonstrate in cars because you're in a showroom and, you have that captive audience and that, quiet environment where you can actually demonstrate these technologies. So it's kind of a no-brainer for the future of in-car entertainment. And finally, I think I can't really end this presentation without talking about the metaverse. So, gaming today has moved beyond gaming. Platforms like Roblox, Fortnite, they're attracting millions of music lovers who want to meet their artists in the metaverse. So, virtual concerts are kind of becoming, a big part of publisher strategies. We saw a couple of years ago as well, Travis Scott's, Astro World event. It drew 27.7 million views over 5 days. Now, obviously, artists want to kind of leverage these huge audiences and, different demographics and be able to connect with them. All of this means that, audio is becoming so important in this whole gaming environment and the virtual world, and especially spatial audio, because spatial audio kind of gives a certain depth when you're in a virtual world. And we believe that it will become a key, success factor when you want to communicate in the metaverse, really. So I've spoken a lot about spatial audio in different situations and different use cases. So I'd just like to give a very high-level summary on what's happening in here. Obviously, as you can see, consumer awareness and interest is growing. Apple's support for spatial audio has accelerated the industry interest. We believe hardware is paving the way to bring spatial audio to consumers. Music streaming services are also bringing better sound to consumers today. And in-car and the metaverse have big potential, future potential for spatial audio. So, with spatial audio, I just want to say one last thing, that is with spatial audio, there's the opportunity to affect a consumer's emotional senses. And if we are able to tap into that, then, there is huge potential for this technology and this experience in the future. So I hope you found my session informative. I'm happy to answer any questions if time permits now or later, possibly as well.
I, as was introduced, so I'm head of TV and music partnerships at Dolby. So before we lead into our panel session, I'm just going to take 10 minutes of your time just to give, I suppose, a Dolby view on our adventures in immersive audio across the last 10 years, but focusing specifically today on music. So as I said, I'm the head of TV and music partnerships. So I have the pleasure in the UK to work with a real mix of different partners. So on the music side, that's labels, streaming services like Apple and Amazon, studio partners, some of whom are joining us today, which is awesome. And then on the TV side, here in the UK, I work with broadcasters like BBC, BT, TV production companies, and a whole plethora of post-production partners. So I won't go into this into too much depth, because I think Mike opened with a really detailed overview of what is immersive audio and the benefits. But from a Dolby Atmos perspective, it's the ability to place any elements of an audio mix anywhere in space, around or over the audience. It's a creative process, so it gives artists, producers, mixers, much more creative freedom than maybe they get with stereo today. But also, as we've just heard from a hardware perspective, it's a format that will play absolutely everywhere, from cars, and that environment's really important because it's it's very close to, or the closest possibly to the studio environment, down to your Apple phone, your Galaxy phone, and absolutely everything in between. So before I get into Dolby Atmos music, just sort of taking a step back and looking at what we've been doing at Dolby around Atmos. So I've been here a really long time. I've been at Dolby 17 years now. So I've been working in the immersive audio space for probably about 12 of those years. So Dolby Atmos as a format obviously started in the theatrical space, and we've just celebrated our 10 years in cinema. There are 6,000 screens globally, which is really awesome. However, it's really been TV globally that's driven the growth of Dolby Atmos across the last kind of 5 to 7 years. So they're actually, interestingly, the UK partners have been sort of front and center of that growth. So here, folks like BT, Sky have used Atmos for coming up to about 6 or 7 years now, for everything from Premier League football to their episodics like Chernobyl. So that's been fantastic. And then obviously that's been replicated globally. So globally, from a streaming perspective, we work with the likes of Netflix, Apple, Google Play, Disney, and regionally, in China, for example, Tencent. So there are close now to 100 partners globally that are delivering Dolby Atmos in all of its various guises. And the experiences are continuing to morph. So podcasts have been increasingly a focus for us in the last 12 months as well. So that's, a really interesting development, specifically around audio drama. But more importantly, around music. So when we launched Atmos 10 years ago, so we always had an ambition, to bring that experience to music. And we've really, been working sort of very diligently across the last 10 years with primarily from a creative point of view, just to make sure that, we had an experience from a playback point of view that would deliver an artist's creative intent. That's kind of the main motivating fact for folks at Dolby. But also that we were creating tools and workflows that music mixers could easily migrate to. So the traction so far, I think, has been, pretty astounding from our point of view. So we're really, very, really proud of what we've achieved sort of globally with all of our music partners. So from a DSP perspective, so we're working with all of the global brands that you see listed here. As I think one of the previous presenters mentioned, I think we saw a shift in the market when Apple Music came on board about 18 months ago, and the partnership together with Apple has been fantastic. Studios have been absolutely front and center of everything that we've done around Dolby Atmos, including the brilliant folks at Metropolis here today. So we now have, as we see here, over 730 studio partners globally, and that's a mix in each market of the major commercial studios like Metropolis. But also, freelancers who are working literally in their gardens, in purpose-built studios, or in their home studio. So that's been fantastic. People always ask us, obviously, about, well, how much content is there? And we use internally the Billboard Top 100 as kind of an indication of music growth, and consistently, sort of month on month, we're tracking about 2/3 of music on the Billboard Top 100 are in Dolby Atmos, which is great. So we're definitely seeing, in terms of new music released, we're getting a lot of traction there with Dolby Atmos, which is great. Beyond that, in all of our markets, we're working really closely now with labels on key catalog. So if I just think about things that we've done, in the UK recently, there's things we've worked on like George Michael, Jimi Hendrix, Def Leppard catalog, Ed Sheeran. So we're definitely starting to see key catalog coming through, which is fantastic. So we've just seen some great stats just about the opportunity in the market around spatial audio. So I won't spend too much time on this, but certainly what we're seeing across our key partners is that the size of the catalogue available in Dolby Atmos, and here specifically I'm talking about Apple and Amazon, that's ramped significantly across the last year. So here I think even Apple have talked to the market about, since their launch 18 months ago, their catalogue size is quadrupled. Also, other data that I'm referencing here seems to indicate that by 2027, a spatial or immersive audio experience will become an everyday occurrence for consumers, and obviously that's across different genre of content beyond music. Also interesting, I think, is the data around not just millennials but also Gen Z. That also seems, to indicate that there's that they're open to paying for this kind of experience as well. So importantly, the question we're often asked by media or all types of the industry is, well, is this a format that has longevity? Are the artists on board? What do consumers think? So, I mean, in our experiences, obviously, we take a lot of time at Dolby to invite, you know, artists, producers, mixers into our office. So we can take the time to, you know, talk to them about the creation process, how mixes translate across all different types of consumer playback experiences. So an open invitation to come and see us in Soho Square. We've got every sort of type of playback there, from a high-end living room to a prototype car to obviously mobile devices. But in our experiences, when you know, artists, mixers, producers come in, they are, you know, they leave really impressed and really excited about the creative opportunities around Atmos, because ultimately, you know, the thing that excites us most and motivates us most is the fact that you know, Dolby Atmos isn't a gimmick, it's a creative process, and it's something that we genuinely think, believe artists are exploring, because it gives them the opportunity to move their music forward. Then from a consumer point of view, so our marketing team are spending a lot of time in terms of social listening, so, you know, to get a sense on what consumers think. And here we see, you know, a really positive trend. Obviously, we're still relatively early on in this Atmos sort of, you know, evolution from a music point of view, but we're seeing, yeah, definitely positive indications here. So first of all, to you know, maybe you're here, I've got an example of a diehard like vinyl fan who here is referencing, you know, the fact that, well, I'm not sure if it's a he or she, but has been listening to Revolver on multiple formats, and actually is really very impressed with the experience on Amazon Music over headphones. And then also another example here of actually this was an influencer that we hosted in our office together with Marathon Music. This was a playback of Bella, of her latest album in Dolby Atmos. And this chap went home, obviously, you know, he'd had different experiences of Atmos in the Dolby office, went home, listened to the mix on Apple over headphones, and apparently it was Chris Blackwalker's. So it was, yeah, I'll definitely be reusing that. So absolutely, we're seeing really positive, you know, feedback from consumers on social channels, which is really important. From an artist and label collaboration, so again, as we had referenced in the previous presentation, so there isn't as much sort of Dolby Atmos catalog out there, of course, as there is in stereo, but that, you know, that's what we as a team are focused on. So what can we do together with labels specifically in the UK to try and support them to, you know, to ramp the availability of catalog as quickly as possible. So there's all different types of things that we're doing there. So we're starting sort of generally with education. So as I said, we have, you know, very much an open door. So we're doing lots of open house events with labels, you know, just to educate them on and demystify the technology. And of course, just to give them the reassurance that an Atmos mix plays brilliantly everywhere. So we're doing a lot of work around that. And then also we've got really active marketing teams globally. So they're looking at different ways in which they can work with a label to amplify a new release or a catalog release. So there again, we're doing, you know, all different types of activations, which yeah, seems so far to be really well received by labels. What we're also doing a lot of specifically in Soho, we're really fortunate that, you know, we've got a great space, we've got a 60-seater screening room. And so there, together with label partners, we've been hosting sort of twice a week playback event for fans. So this has been awesome, actually. So in, yeah, across, I suppose, since the decline of COVID, when we could welcome people back in, we've been, we've done events together with, as you see here, the likes of Robbie Williams, Bella, Easy Life. We did a wonderful session a couple of weeks ago with for the Jimi Hendrix re-release, where we had Eddie Kramer, the original producer, on a Zoom talking to the fans in the room. So it's been really awesome, actually, just to bring people together and just take the time just to appreciate all this beautiful music in this new way. So again, the labels out there listening today, an open invitation, please. We'd love to collaborate with you more and make your journey into Dolby Atmos and immersive audio as pain-free as it possibly can be. So what's next? I'm totally going to dodge the metaverse question. But in terms of what our focus is at the moment, so in terms of streaming, it's really catalogue and supporting indie labels. In the UK, that's super important for us this year. And then the immediate focus from a hardware point of view is automotive. So that's a massively growing space. So as we heard, Mercedes recently launched their first different ranges of cars with Atmos, which is awesome. So we're talking to, of course, multiple brands within that space, but also beyond Mercedes. Volvo recently announced they'll be launching next year, Polestar, Lotus. There are already brands in market in China. Lucid in America has already launched. So that's a big focus for us, because as you pointed out previously, that's a space that we all like to escape and listen to music. So, and the car sounds awesome. Beyond that, what we are seeing when labels come in to meet us in Soho is, what else can we do? We've invested now in Atmos for our album. What else can we do for it? So, ultimately, we're an engineering company. Innovation is our lifeblood. So, of course, for us, we're constantly thinking about, well, how can we support artists and labels to derive further benefit out of their Dolby Atmos investment. So I suppose that, the first sort of easiest way is around sort of, music concerts and documentaries. Given the fact that we are working with so many partners globally who already carry this type of content, Netflix, Disney, Sky, etc., there's a lot of opportunity within that space. Also in terms of live streaming and broadcasting. So we have collaborated in the past with Sky, specifically in the UK. They've done Isle of Wight and Download in Dolby Atmos for a couple of years. But this year at Tomorrowland, we collaborated directly with the festival, and they live streamed 2 of their stages across, I think it was 3 weekends, to a number of their different apps. So that was, that was really cool. That's a very interesting development. Beyond that, I mean, longer term, I guess the sky's the limit. We've done with William Orbit a first NFT that's both in Atmos and Dolby Vision, which we can talk about that another day. And then also from like an in-venue perspective, we've got like one experience that we're partnering with MGM in Vegas, which is so an in-stadium experience. So that's been live now for, coming up to a year. So there we've collaborated with a number of different artists. I think Aerosmith are there currently. So that's again a really interesting development. And beyond that, of course, ultimately one of our ambitions around Atmos is that, we democratize immersive audio from a playback perspective. So, as in the past, if you wanted great surround sound, you had to go and, invest a lot of money. And that's what when we were developing Atmos, we, you know, didn't want that to be the case. We wanted it, as the previous presenter talked about, we wanted it to play on any phone with any pair of headphones. So that's really great. But then also, you know, from a creation point of view, we know now that talking to our sort of service partners, they want to, you know, kind of broaden the net as well. So, you know, what can we do in sort of the bedroom music producer space to enable those folks to, you know, who don't have the skills of the folks here. So what can we do in that space to just improve the output of audio? So that's another area that we're looking at. Good, thank you. Yeah, so thanks for listening. And again, just to, you know, label partners that are either in the room or online. As I've said, you know, we're here to help you. We want to make your sort of journey into Atmos as pain-free as it possibly can be. So please don't be shy in making contact with us. So as I mentioned, sort of our studio partners have been absolutely front and center of everything that we've done around Dolby Atmos. Whenever, you know, we develop a new experience, we start with, you know, the creators first in mind. And to that end, Miles, who works directly with sort of our music partners in the UK, is going to now lead a panel discussion with some of our esteemed mixer partners to talk about their experiences across the last couple of years. So thank you.
All good. Well, I'll start talking while everybody's getting adjusted. And introduce myself. I started working at Dolby at the beginning of last year. 20 odd years ago, one of my first jobs, I started working at the Cocktail Twin studio initially, but then came and started working here. So I used to make cables in a room just down there. And then I then sort of went from here to the Strong Room and then started working with Pete Townsend and The Who on and off for 18 years, blah, 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 until I eventually ended up working for Dolby at the beginning of last year. My own sort of route into this is quite interesting because back 25 years ago when I was working at the Strong Room or whenever it was, 5.1 was a thing. And we had a 5.1 room there. There was one here, I seem to remember. And there was a sort of general idea that people would start making 5.1 records. And what was really interesting back then, and I was a snotty-nosed, cynical assistant, and I would just sort of generally took it, I was cynical about it, and the idea being, well, who's got this? Who listens? Who's going to listen to music this way? Anybody that I knew that was into this kind of thing was generally into movies and had a crap music taste. That was my opinion of it back then. And then when this came up, the idea about installing a Dolby Atmos system into a studio on a boat that I used to run, I started looking into it, and suddenly I realized this could work on headphones. This could work on other things outside of having to only sit on your sofa to listen to this extra disc that you bought and all this gear that you might have bought. So it sort of gained my interest, and then sure enough, I ended up working at Dolby. So I'm here to talk with some of the guys that are making some Atmos mixes. So if you just want to do a bit of an introduction to what you do and who you are and what you do, that would be great.
Right. Okay, first. So my name's Ali Staten. I'm a mixer predominantly and sometimes producer. I've been doing this professionally since 1989, which seems shocking to me. But I worked at commercial studios in London and then was in-house at Island Records just down the road when it was in St. Peter's Square in their studio, and then went freelance and have continued in that realm. So I've seen the transition from analog tape to digital audio workstations to now working in Dolby Atmos. And that's what I'm here to talk about.
My name is Mike Hillier. I'm one of the mastering engineers here at Metropolis. Hopefully you caught my thing earlier on, so you kind of got the basic idea of who I am. Yeah, I work here. I do a good portion of the Atmos work here. I've been at this is my second time at the studio. I started here in 2006 as a night receptionist and slowly worked my way up. I'm doing a bit better now.
Hi, I'm Prash, known as Engine is Mystery. I'm originally a producer, but now I'm mainly for the last decade a mix and mastering engineer and Atmos engineer. I run two Atmos studios. The first one launched at Tileyard, and then we expanded to a second one up in Norwich. I guess multiple Grammy nominations and Mercury nominations and all of those kind of things aside, you know, my focus is an obsession with audio. I'm in-house with Georgia Smith's label FAM. So I've worked with her and her team since the beginning. Liam Howlett, is an in-house mastering engineer. And yeah, I work on multiple genres across international labels. And yeah, just trying to help them get their audio where they want it.
Excellent, thank you. Well, we've all got sort of different kinds of studios here. There's a commercial studio and then there's two kind of private studios involved here. So just without getting too nerdy and too into detail, how did you find the installation of your Atmos studio experience? Yeah, just tell us a little bit about the rooms that you're working in. Obviously, lots of people just think there's loads of speakers involved in this. So if you can just give us a rough idea about how you found that, what kind of prompted you to do it, and yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Yeah, let's go. We'll go in order.
I started looking into Atmos about a year and a half ago, and made contact with Dolby directly. Spoke to Miles, who we sort of knew each other a little bit, and they were incredibly helpful in helping me understand the format and what I would need. I have a small mix suite based at Real World Studios, which is just outside Bath. And I've been working in there for about 16 years, mixing predominantly in my space. And then since about April this year, it's been set up for Dolby Atmos. And it was, I did a lot of the work myself. So the DI aspect of it was pretty challenging, but the technical side of it was relatively straightforward, helped by the guys, Richard and Miles at Dolby.
I think we started talking about an immersive room about 2.5 years ago, and we were looking to do it kind of unrelated to what we ended up doing it for. We had a few other ideas, and then about a year and a half ago, just as it was very close to being finished, the Apple launch of Dolby Atmos happened, and kind of overnight our plans changed, and it was just kind of fortunate that everything had aligned in such a way that as that happened, we had a room that was going to be really easily kind of workable for that purpose. So it was all done by people far better than me. I had no part in the actual build itself. Just I came in and one day it was done. It's great.
And yourself, Prash?
So hello, sorry. Ours came from a slightly different perspective because our first room was a stereo room, which we then adapted to Atmos. So that was a slightly different scenario. The main things, and our second room was a dedicated Atmos room. So the first room, when you're adapting a stereo room, audio is generally facing one way. It's the speaker's back. So you have to kind of alter your room to work best with the acoustics from an encompassing immersive experience. Whereas the second room was a dedicated Atmos room that was a lot easier to put that together. And yeah, we did it all ourselves. Actually, I don't think anyone from Dolby's been around yet, but you're welcome anytime. And yeah, we've delivered, thousands of mixes from there. And just through lots of referencing, room correction. Both of our rooms are the first Amphion rooms in the country as well. So we set them up. We found that was you kind of don't need loads of massive speakers. You need the right speakers in the right places for localization. So that was really our approach to it, and making sure that it translated well to Apple and other delivery places.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, we won't go too deep into the nerdery of it, but we're talking about speakers here, but obviously there's got to be a route to those speakers, and as Mike talked about at the beginning, the whole point of this is free of speakers. However you listen to Dolby Atmos doesn't mean that you've got a particular set of speakers around you. It's not channel based anymore. It might be headphones, it might be a smart speaker which might have multiple speaker drivers in it, but it might not be the same speaker count as a 11.1.8 room downstairs or whatever, or a cinema. The whole point that this is a scalable playback thing, which sort of I mean, we'll talk a little bit about beds and objects and things in a minute, again, without getting too nerdy. But the main thing I sort of will explain is that the tools that Jane was talking about, we have this thing called the Dolby Atmos renderer. And this renderer is a piece of software. Up to date, this has been a piece of software that has sat just after your DAW. So your Pro Tools, your Logic, your Cubase, Nuendo, DaVinci Resolve, and so on and so forth. The idea being that you come out of your DAW into the renderer. Now, as Mike was saying earlier on, traditionally, you could look at the DAW as a mixing console. A lot of people mix in the box, as it were. Now there's a desk right there, which has got hundreds of channels on it, or 90 something. And that traditionally would have gone down to a left and a right. So you're mixing down to a left and a right. The idea, as Mike said, is that you're no longer bouncing everything down to that 2 bus, to that mix bus of two channels, or even 5.1, which is a 6-channel thing. The idea being that however you choose to align your tracks and whatever, however you choose to mix those together, you could have, traditionally a tape machine might have been a 16-track or a 24-track. You could have 24 items coming into the Dolby renderer, and then it works out where those items are placed in space with an X, Y, and Z coordinate, as Mike was talking about. So that's, so the idea of that is the renderer then chooses what to do in that particular playback instance. So in a studio, that's a 7.1.4 room or a 11.1.8 or whatever your studio is. It will take all of that information and you can then mix it appropriately so that it's working within your space. However, a version of that renderer sits on every one of those consumer devices. So if it's a smart speaker, for example, it will say, I'm a 5.1.2 smart speaker or soundbar or whatever. So I just need this little piece of rendering to work for what I am. And that's part of what Dolby does is sells that that particular possibility into each of those devices. So this renderer is available, as I said. It was previously available as an external to Pro Tools, Logic, Cubase, Nuendo, DaVinci Resolve. It's actually been integrated into a lot of those softwares already, and what we're hoping is it'll be integrated into all of them, of course, ultimately. But it's a quite simple thing. Once you get your head around it, there's a learning curve, which we'll talk about. But but the idea being that it's for every engineer that sort of gets on top of this, there's this learning curve. But it's quite a straightforward way of thinking about things once you get there. So maybe we can just talk about the learning curve a little bit. So how have you found that, beds and objects, the idea that you're no longer thinking about a left and a right or 5 or whatever speakers? How have you found that? How have you found that learning process? How long did it take? Yeah, let's go the other way.
So one of the reasons I initially got into Atmos was to maintain QC for our clients on the stereos level. So we were delivering mix and masters for these artists, and the version that was going online sounded very, very different to the mix and master we'd spent many months getting right. So when we came to building the studio, and even when it came to how we approached the mixes and the workflow, it always with respect to the stereo original. We had to make sure that all of that artistic intention was delivered correctly through to Apple or wherever it was going to live afterwards. So the workflow for us was always making sure that we can go back and reference that original mix, make sure that that's correct, and then extend the technical kind of fascination of immersive audio from there. So that was how we approached it.
Yeah, it was much the same for me. My interest in Atmos stemmed from exactly that. It was I've built relationships with artists and producers and labels and creators, and you work for weeks and weeks on a stereo mix, as I've done for years, and then the idea of then handing that over to a third party who doesn't have that connection because they basically had the tools was the kind of impetus for me to go, well, I need to invest in that so that there's someone on the inside of that creative team who can oversee that next stage of the process. Plus, I've just got an interest in audio fundamentally, so I wanted to experience that technology as well and make that part of what I can offer the artists that I work with.
And I mean, where that's concerned, obviously, Mike, you're a mastering engineer as well. So,
Yeah.
you know, where Ali said that he wanted to keep hold of his, you know, his stereo work and then take it into Atmos and Prush as well. But there are some people who are kind of quite happy to hand over their stereo stems, for example, which I guess is, you know, people have had this misnomer of, can I master in Atmos? And, you know, what that means to people is slightly different. So maybe you can explain a bit about that and then what you've been doing on that front.
Yeah, so I guess that's right. The big difference is I'm a mastering engineer. Most of what I do, even in the stereo world, is taking on things that these guys have been working on, or you know, other engineers, for a long time, and then I work on it for a few hours, and it's a very different kind of role. And so in the Atmos space, I'm mostly doing the same thing. Not 100%. Some of the stuff is stuff that I've done the stereo mix for. But a lot of it is stuff where I'm being sent stems, and similar to what these guys were both saying, actually, my goal is just to make it sound like the stereo version, but immersive. Like I want you to be, I want the music to be the thing that pushes me in the direction that I take it, and not the technology. I think one of the fears that a lot of people have, whether they're artists or other engineers, because we engineers, you know, we really do care about the music that we're working on and that we're putting out. And so when we listen to something, we don't want that thing to be just, and now this bit spins because it can, and this bit's gone behind me because it can. It's got to, whatever's in the music has to be the thing that makes that decision. And a lot of the time, it's a lot like mastering. You know, when I sit down to do a master, I listen to the song and I go, oh, I know what has to happen now. I know, you know, it needs a bit more of this. It needs squashing here. It needs multi-band. It needs widening here, blah, blah, blah. And then I go into Atmos and I'm like, okay, I know what needs to happen here. That thing needs to go over there. That thing needs to go from back to front. And that thing needs a bit of height to it. It's there already. I'm just doing it.
Yeah. What I draw from this, and obviously I'm meeting lots of different people all the time. And what's really interesting, this is covering lots of bases. You know, within the cut and thrust hardcore pop world, is actually, it's not unusual for somebody to go, here's the stuff, mix it, then get it mastered. And I'm not suggesting that artist isn't particularly involved, but sometimes that may be the case. However, with other people, they might get, you know, artists themselves might get deeply involved in it. And, you know, there's people like Helena here who, you know, are actually getting fully involved in the technology themselves, using Ableton Live in her case, or Logic or whatever. And they can get into this themselves and they can take that right through to the end. Other people in bands or whatever might have some interest. They might be involved in, you know, coming in and being involved in that mix. Or it might be a case of, we're handing this to somebody who's going to do a great job. So it's quite reassuring that we're covering all bases here and in the room, and that seems to be the way things are working. I just wanted to go on to headphones, which you started talking a little bit about before. Something like 80-ish%, don't quote me on that, of music is listened to on headphones anyway, just by default, just, you know, the way that we go about our daily lives. So, and as I said before, my interest in this instantly became higher when I knew that this worked on headphones and binaural listening. So I've got my own thoughts on that, and the way that I kind of visualize it and theorize it is that we've been generally mixing across two speakers in a room, and what we've been listening to on headphones for the last 50 years is that speaker and that speaker bolted onto our ears, firing directly in. There's a 60-degree angle from, you know, stereo in its original form was a microphone pointing there, a microphone pointing there, and as a result of that kind of image that you got between the two, if that was an orchestra or whatever, gave you something that felt like you were standing in front of it. That was the idea of stereo, and that evolved with mixing desks and, you know, left and right buses and the Beatles and the Stones and all of those people that would shove the drums that side. If you think about Crosstown Traffic by Jimi Hendrix, when there's a guitar at the beginning that goes da-da-da-da-da-da-da, that's because they were probably in the studio that had a pan pot for the first time. Prior to that, you could go left or right or both. That's what it was about. So what we've been thinking with stereo, you know, for headphones wise, is actually technically quite weird what we've been listening to. You've mixed it for some speakers that are there in a room, and then you bolt it onto your head and you don't get the same experience. It's not like sitting in the sweet spot of a studio. So as Mike said before, you're binauralizing. The whole idea is you should be being placed into a space, but what should that space be? So I just want to see what, you know, with the tools that are given, how do you go about taking something, you've been working in stereo for a long time. How do you get the idea about creating an immersive mix that isn't crazy? Or how do you control that? How do you make sure that that thing that people are listening to is what you think the audience want to hear? Let's start here.
So, well, obviously I've spent a long time working in stereo, so I'm very comfortable in that. And that's how we've all listened to music for a long time. And stereo mixing, especially now the track count in the last 20 odd years have gone up. We used to be limited to 24 tracks analog, and you had to deliver all of your creative ideas in that song, that production on that sort of limited format. Now with, all the DAWs around, there's literally no limit. I mean, some of the multi-tracks I get are 160 plus tracks of audio. It's really difficult. Well, it's hard enough just to sit there and listen through all of that stuff when you receive it, to then start to make an idea of how you're going to deliver that person's production so that it can be listened to across a wide range of different listening devices. And people have kind of become focused on making things louder and sort of brighter and really squashing all of that information into this stereo spectrum. And in a way, Atmos has sort of freed that up a little bit. It's not quite as hard to squeeze all of that data and information across the stereo spread. You've got a little bit more of a plane in which to present those artistic ideas, to let elements feature so that the listener can feel emotionally moved by something. And it's not fighting for space in this sort of conventional stereo mix. And that's been quite a revelation for me. It's actually opened up a load more creative opportunities that, you just couldn't achieve previously. So that's been a really positive thing.
I mean, I guess from my perspective, the way I've always been excited about mixing is to kind of envisage it as a 3D space anyway. Even if you've only got the two speakers, is kind of perceiving a sphere around that listening area. So we were always investing in strange binaural tools and weird effects units, choruses, to try and create that placement in stereo anyway, so that when you heard a mix on headphones, it would blow you away. It would make your mix sound just that little bit extra special, which gets people more involved in the music. So when Atmos, originally I was on Auro 3D on Blu-ray, then when Atmos came around, it just expanded that. So we could expand that toolbox of tricks and actually apply them to genuine audio delivery. Just say, right, we want something to feel like it's there, I can just put it there, and it can still feel like that, and it can still move as one thing, but be placed in an emotionally contextual way. So yeah, I don't think it was necessarily a barrier, as more of a veil being dropped and having to use less weird effects to achieve the same goal. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Mike, have you got any thoughts in terms of, how do you build a depth in binaural? Would you just take something and say, let's plonk you down, let's take this mix that I've got in this room. So you're mixing in the room downstairs. Should it sound the same as it sounds in that room? Should it be the same as other studios that we've got up and running, like Abbey Road something, or British Grove something, or a tiny cupboard studio? We've seen a few of those as well. How do you go about, what should it sound like, or should it be individual items? We've got these things called binaural metadata settings, for example. Are they something that you're using a lot of?
Yeah, I mean, it's not done until those are part of the mix. That is as I was going to say as important, but probably even more important actually than everything else. As you mentioned, it's 80-90% of people who are listening on headphones. So if you don't pay attention to the binaural metadata, then you're missing the point and you're not producing a final mix. It's just not finished. The way I would go about that, I have tried doing a mix entirely on headphones and then taking them off and listening to it in the room. Mm-hmm. Wasn't a good experience. Working the other way around does tend to work. When I build my mix into the room, put the headphones on, I set my metadata up, and there's a certain amount of that which is just, oh look, I know I want this to be far. It's a far away sound. It's supposed to be distant. And there's a certain bit of where you're like, let's just test, let's just play around. Then you as you play around, you get closer or further away from what you think is the best presentation of that piece of music. And sometimes it does surprise you, and you end up placing things in positions that you wouldn't necessarily have guessed at. But then the goal, once I do that, is that I put the headphones on, and I feel like I'm in the same space that I was in, a minute ago when I didn't have the headphones on. And the big kind of technological leap for me was when earlier this year, the beta version of the personalized head-related transfer functions came out, and I actually got that, which I'd never got before. The default HRTF, the average human head, is not my head. It definitely isn't my head. And so when I put the headphones on originally, I felt like I was having to learn how to listen binaurally. And things sounded spatial. I could kind of go, oh yeah, that thing is now vaguely over this way somewhere, but I couldn't place it. And then with the personalized head-related transfer function, things just got a lot more localized very quickly. And I found that really exciting.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of some kind of psychoacoustic learning that happens anyway. If we've all been listening to two speakers, strapped onto our heads from a stereo mix, when you have to actually really start listening, which is great, because you suddenly start when it kind of locks, it's fantastic.
Mark, can I add something? Good. So one of the challenges I think with this format, just over the last couple of years, which is getting much better now, is that spatial audio. So there's two things. We've got Atmos, for which we listen to binaurally, but then spatial audio, which is Apple's adaptation of Atmos, which you're listening to in your AirPods. Now that actually completely strips away all of the Dolby metadata, which can be a bit of a challenge for us mixers, because we'll, as these guys know, spend ages building this beautiful headphone mix, and then it's gone when it goes to AirPods. So I've found referencing through Apple extremely important. We have to have, I've got 2 different generations of AirPods. I've got AirPod Maxes. We've got a laptop from Apple routed to our Atmos system. We're literally checking on all of those delivery systems, because it doesn't matter how good it sounds to us. If it goes out and it doesn't resonate with the listener like the stereo does, or God forbid, worse than the stereo, we're in big problems. And the artist may or may not have heard it, and they may not have signed it off. It might be an A&R. And if the artist then hears it and we're back to remixing, that's a big challenge. So I think really referencing on the products and the destination where the most people want to listen to, we found really important in the long run.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to make. That's not really name. 5 minutes. Okay, lovely. Well, thanks. I mean, I know you're asking me a question now. It's quite a tricky one to answer on a camera. But yeah, we talked about binaural metadata settings, the idea that you can build a mix out. Yeah, I mean, that's the way that the Dolby have created these tools, and that makes sense. So, that's the way it sounds in the studio. And as you say, there are other versions of that. You can take a Dolby mix. You can do, the ADM format itself is a open format. You can play it back however you want. But ultimately, yes, generally speaking, you've mixed it using those binaural metadata settings, and I imagine, or perhaps you can tell me, that's the way you'd like it. You'd like to
Definitely would love Apple to take the binaural settings.
Cut that all out. Thank you. So one other thing that it's not written down here, but actually somebody asked the question earlier on about upmixing and upmixing and obviously splitting stems or making a multi-track from something that exists on a stereo from the past. And Mike made the good point that if you're there are upmixing things that allow you to take stereo and it does some special stuff and it does make it sound more spacious. However, what we've been talking about here when we're talking about objects and tracks and what have you is the idea that you can make a discrete Atmos mix where you get to choose where those things go around you. And you mentioned a little bit about sort of demixing software, things that that will take a stereo mix, and it's kind of like the holy grail, really, the idea that you can take a stereo mix and find a lost a missing multi-track. You can go in there and say, that's the guitar, that's the bass, those are the drums, there's the vocal, there's the synthesizer, whatever. And there, yeah, as you say, there's the possibilities there are really increasing. There's lots of movement forward in terms of being able to do that and then you can do an Atmos mix with those. Yeah, if you can't find the multi-track and that's the absolute, or there's no stems or whatever, then yeah, of course, that's a way you can go back and you can do a special job. It's better to do that than to upmix it, I would say. Hopefully you would agree with that. But yes, it's definitely worth going back to the highest quality original source and mixing from that. I mean, hopefully, I just wanted to get that in as a kind of, as part of that question from earlier. So finally, we've got 3 minutes now. So what do you hope and expect to see happen with Immersive and with Atmos? Where we're at now is there's lots of people listening to it, we hope. And in terms of, devices out there, there are cars on their way. We've got a car in the Dolby office. So as Jane says, anybody that hasn't been down, please come down and listen to our facilities and we can guide you through it. We've got a Volvo that Dolby have put together with Bowers and Wilkins speakers in, which sounds fantastic. So please do. But what are your thoughts and what would you like to see happen?
Well, I would encourage you all to take up that offer, because if you haven't yet heard immersive sound or Dolby Atmos in a speaker environment, that's definitely worth it. The mixes that I've done where I've managed to get artists to come down, or in case we came up to Dolby's facility in London, it had a really profound effect, and it's great. And so I'm all for encouraging.
Emily was in tears.
She was, yeah. Encouraging people to experience it, and hopefully, hardware manufacturers will bring on board sound bars and headphones, and so that we can push the technology out and allow listeners and consumers to really experience the benefits.
Yeah. What do you mind?
I guess there's a couple of things from a creative point of view that I'd like to see. The first of those is somewhat obvious, which is just artists getting on board with conceptualizing their Atmos mix at the earlier and earlier stages of production. So rather than just kind of dumping a bunch of stems on me at the end and going, well, the stereo's done, so give me an Atmos, kind of going, here is the plan. We did it from the very beginning. These extra tracks we recorded just for the Atmos version, and we need this part to do this. And whenever I've been in the studio with an artist for doing demos, the look on their face, like the creative ideas that are coming instantly, they're just like, oh, and I've had musicians literally say, I've got an idea for an entirely new part for this song now. You can't put it on. You can't, it's too late. So that, more and more artists thinking about that earlier is going to be fantastic. But I would also like to see more tools, more like creative tools from our end. So at the moment, it's really fascinating to get in and be kind of automating all of these elements, but I'm excited to see what happens next with plugins that perhaps, I've got ideas for things that could happen, like plugins that would maybe be, do the automation kind of in response to things that happen, and just new creative ideas coming through in that sense.
Great, thank you. What about yourself, Prash?
I think, Mike's covered a lot of that, actually. I think people composing with an Atmos situation in mind from the beginning, I think is going to be fascinating. Score composers being able to write with Atmos in mind from the offset is just a brilliant thing to happen. For me, thinking about tools, a really good automation tool, a physical way to move things around the space. Personally, I don't think it exists yet.
Yeah.
It's still a bit, okay, we've got to move this lever and this knob to move it around. Yeah. There still needs to be a better solution for that.
Yeah, we're creating access for all of that, in terms of the SDKs and stuff, and the software getting into the DAWs, that it's all available for people to be able to access. So that's great.
Yeah, that's it. And I think other than that, it's just, more and more of this out there in the environment for people to hear it. I think we're on that track already.
Hello, my name is Dani Valkova, and I'm an audio director, a creative director, and a composer in the realms of linear and interactive media. Very excited to be chatting with you today about the new frontier of immersive audio and what that means for our users, our brands, and our audience. How do we unlock the capabilities, and how can we make sure that we're not left behind in today's noisy world? What we'll be covering today is going over where we currently are in the world of immersive audio and where we're stepping into. From there, we will discuss what problems is immersive audio looking to solve and how are we looking to solve them. What sonic branding opportunities exist in the immersive space and how are they accessible by both brands and artists? And finally, what are the next steps as we move into the next frontier of immersive audio? It is a very busy space and there are a lot of brands and artists out there with quick accessibility trying to be heard. So it is more imperative now more than ever that we understand what this space holds and how it can be best utilized for the benefit of our brands and our artists moving forward. It is a brand new area and it is evolving every day. So understanding the lingo and understanding the capabilities both from creatively and technologically is paramount in understanding how we can strategically use this technology for the benefit of our users and brand partnerships. So, where are we at currently with immersive audio? Well, we started off traditional audio in terms of linear audio. In this sense, we're talking about what we know as normal ads, ad campaigns, film, anything that is linear. So there isn't a lot of user interaction or audience interaction there. Everything is in a stereo field. We normally have a left speaker and a right speaker. It can also be mono, but it does always have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And our audience can't really get in there and understand exactly what's going on, and it does not exist in a 3D space. From there, we entered the world of immersive surround sound. When we use those words, we're talking about things like Dolby, surround sound home theater, binaural, and anything to do with 3D mapping where we have introduced more than just left and right on a flat plane, but we also are now working with up and down. So we're creating a 3D space environment. Our next frontier in immersive audio is what I would like to call Immersive Sound 2.0. What that means is taking what we have already achieved with surround sound Dolby and adding an additional layer, and that is the layer of interactivity. Where immersive surround sound created a 3D space, but the user and the audience remained locked in place at that point. What we're achieving and what we're moving forward to with Immersive 2.0 is adding a layer of interaction where the user is actually allowed to move into that space and the audio adapts around them to match what they're interacting with, what they're close to, the proximity, and in that way they are in the driver's seat to tell the narrative in the way that they are connected with it. Think of things as the ground up. We have the 3D room of Immersive 1.0, and then at 2.0, we unlock the user and give them the freedom to roam. The more freedom we instill into our users and our audience, the more empowered they feel to participate in our experiences, and the more empowered they feel, the stronger their connection to the message that we're delivering. Turning our attention now to, all right, we have this new frontier of technology. We are able to utilize sound and music and connect with our brands in ways we've never been able to do before. But what problem does this solve? Why would we even want to engage with immersive audio? What benefits can it deliver to our projects, to our artists, and to our brand awareness? I'd like to start this with a few key takeaways from the data perspective. The first is the increase to user impressions by incorporating sound alongside the visuals. Data has shown that the minute we have immersive audio, the minute we are engaging with our audience through sound, we are much more likely to have that click-through rate. We're much more likely to have our users pique their interest, get them excited, evoke their curiosity, and encourage them to engage with our experience. Leading in through this, once we do have them in that experience, utilizing immersive audio has shown an increase to the length of time a user remains in the experience. It is that sense of curiosity, that excitement, their ability to continue to explore the space and discover something new when they feel that they are in the driver's seat that keeps them engaged with our projects. the longer we have our audience engaged with our projects and our brands and artists, the deeper those connections to those brands are, and the deeper the sense of loyalty, giving us more fruitful, more beneficial, and more long-term connections with our audience. And finally, a little bit of science. Anytime we engage multiple parts of our senses, it is shown that that helps memory retention, and the campaign message or the message behind our brands are much more likely to stick through the long term. In that way, we deepen our connection to our users and brands. Moving away from the data bits and pieces, the problem that immersive audio can help us solve is the problem of realism and disconnection. We are more globalized than ever before, and yet we are in some ways further apart than ever before. Being able to recreate what we have in the physical world through virtual experiences in our living room, in our headphones, gives us a sense of realism to connect with our audience that way, as though they're standing right in front of us. It is as though that brand, that artist is connecting with you personally, and you are engaged in their universe. This is the first time in technological history that we're able to do this with sound, and sound is such an important part to the way that we connect to artists and brands. Thirdly, the problem that immersive audio looks to solve, again, is the issue of connection. The connection we have to artists and brands is enforced, is strengthened through immersive audio, especially when it comes to our younger audience members. Most brands think of audio in traditional settings. Think of TVCs, linear ads. Occasionally it's consumed at a store or some sort of pop-up. But traditional media is consumed less and less by the younger generation. It is, for example, in a sense of a YouTube ad where it is very traditional, it is very linear, there's nothing really going on other than that one sound bed with sound design in the background, and we skip it most of the time. Our younger audience now are found in the realms of the metaverse, of VR, of games, of things that help them interact with their space in a virtual sense. If one of the key metrics of our campaigns is to reach the younger audience, then we must make noise for them where they are hanging out. And they are hanging out in immersive environments. And understanding how audio fits into that immersive environment is paramount to making a connection with them. And finally, what problems does immersive audio solve? Featuring multiple tracks in an interactive space packs opportunities for sync and licensing deals for our artists far beyond what is achievable through traditional media. This also increases the opportunity for us to be very strategic and selective in our sonic branding. Immersive audio unlocks many new opportunities for our brands through strategic use of sonic branding. But what new opportunities does it unlock for our artists? And how can they really utilize this new technology to further their reach to their audience? For this, we turn our attention to sync deals and licensing. Yes, as things stand now, in order to enjoy immersive audio when thinking about artist albums or artist songs, there are a few hoops and hurdles that your audience must jump through in order to access your content in that way. First of all, they must have access to hardware that is able to deliver sound through surround sound Dolby Atmos, especially. Think things like surround sound home theaters or special headsets and headgear. Outside of that, all of that domain still needs to exist on a streaming platform that supports that method as well. Think things like Apple Music or Tidal now as well. But if we only think of the benefit that immersive audio delivers to artists as existing solely within the way that they deliver their current album and song range, then that is a dangerous underestimation of the power and the potential of immersive audio. Where things get really interesting is what doors are unlocked in terms of brand relationships and the deals that artists and brands can get through to together in order to advance both of the brand awareness collectively. In this sense, there is a spectrum, if you will, on how much creative freedom and how much involvement each part of that collaboration participates in. On one side of the spectrum, we have something where the brand partnership and the artists are still quite separate in the way that they deliver their content. And on the other, it's much more collaborative and intertwined. To give a quick example of both sets of the spectrum, I'll start with the first. So this is a very typical example where there's a brand partnership for a certain artist. And that artist, say, for example, would like to do something in the VR, the metaverse, any of those spaces for their music. What they can do is enter a collaboration whereby a certain purchase of a brand's product gives them a ticket or an admission to an online experience, a digital experience to be had in a VR world, in the metaverse, in any of those platforms that do support immersive audio. And in there lies the artist concert. The only way the user can have that access to the artist, that sense of being part of a concert that they potentially may not be able to attend otherwise due to price, location, travel, all of those logistical things, all of those barriers are now eliminated, and they're able to attend the concert by way of accessing the product of the brand. So the brand product is sold. The sale of the product gives them admission into the immersive audio experience of the artist, and then they are pushed forward in the user experience to have that experience with the artist in an immersive audio space. In that way, the immersive audio space experience with the artist acts as a motivator, as a catalyst for the sale for the brand at the beginning. Those are two quite separate things. So the artist is still in control entirely of the experience within the concert, and the brand exists as a separate entity controlling the sale of the product, and there's not too much of a mismatch or an interaction between the two. On the other side of the spectrum, other opportunities exist for artists and brands to work alongside each other in an immersive space in a more collaborative fashion. One example of this is, say, creating a 3D immersive audio space by which the user can move around the 3D space, and in each corner of the room, a different immersive audio sound, song, part of the album is shared with them. As they near that part of the room sonic bed transforms, and it is as though that artist is performing personally in front of that user at that point in time. As they move to another point of the room, a different song comes about. As they navigate around the room, different music comes around, swirls around them. One way this can be utilized is as the user moves around the room, it goes through the back catalog and the history of the artist. Now, think of this as matching and being paralleled with a brand partnership. Say that brand partnership is with a brand where the room is transformed into a place in history for that brand. Perhaps it could be how a retail store looked like around the same time as that song came out or that artist had a monumental moment. So the music and the visuals are acting like a time travel, going through history to give a sense of identity to both the artist and the brand. In this way, the communicated message for the artist and that brand are the same. You are part of my history. I'm taking you on a journey through time with me. And that's how a sense of deeper loyalty, deeper understanding can be built with both the artist and the brand. In the immersive audio space, the laws of time and physics dissolve. And it is within them that the limitations of sound dissolve too. The potential for brands and artists to connect with their audience is only limited by our creativity. All right, so we have discussed how we got here in the immersive audio space. What is Immersive 2.0, the next frontier in immersive sound? We've discussed what problems immersive audio looks to solve for our users, and how we can utilize its advantages both from a brand perspective and from an artist perspective. But what are the next steps? What are the key takeaways here? How can we move into that space from here on in? A few key tips. The first one, the importance of speaking to your client about the opportunities, the benefits, and the power of utilizing immersive audio from the start of a project. It should never be an afterthought. It should be ingrained into the way that we move creatively, from pitch to delivery of a project. With that, the utilization of an audio director, an audio specialist that is able to work alongside the director and the creative director to understand the vision of the project and understand on a very intricate level what audio needs to be implemented and how that can be best utilized in the platform that the experience lives in. And finally, don't be afraid to take risks or you'll get left behind. Linear sound is in the past. Interactive, spatial, and 3D audio is our future. It is the key to connecting to our audience. It is the key to connecting to our users. The strength of the platform needs to be understood. The needs of the users need to be understood, and translating that with sound as a signpost in the user journey are the solutions to be heard in tomorrow's noisy world. My name is Dani Valkova. It's been a pleasure to speak with you today. It's a topic I'm very passionate about, and I appreciate the opportunity to have a chat about it with you all today. And if anyone else wants to reach out and have a chat, you can find me on LinkedIn.
We're now going to hear from the artists talking about the immersive space and how they're using it in both live and recorded music. Now, I am particularly excited about our next guest. Why? Because we actually went to school together and we played the drums together. We learned to play the drums, and years later, I ended up being a professional percussionist touring in the mainstream, and this guest is here at the cutting edge of immersive audio, and it's live. So her name's already been mentioned today, and she's going to talk about the immersive space. Please welcome to the stage, Helena Rice.
Brilliant. Thanks, Susan, for that intro. And thanks again to BPI for inviting me to speak here today. So I'm going to come with a slightly different perspective, as Susan mentioned. So my way into immersive is actually purely been from the live experience side, and so far not actually in non-recorded or released music. So just to give a brief background, I'm an electronic music producer and live AV artist. And the music I produce ranges from quite abstract soundscapes into more beat-driven music that's inspired by producers like John Hopkins and Max Cooper. So it's kind of in that idea of wheelhouse of this. In terms of the project, I like to say that I try and unite art, music, and technology in what I do. And my aim is to create immersive experiences that really envelop the audience and make them feel as if they're transported out of their day-to-day experience. Innovation is really key to what I do. I'm always interested in innovation, whether that's in visuals, in creative production methods, and it's one of the reasons why immersive audio was very interesting to me. And again, just to give a view, so apart from the music side, I'm very inspired by art projects. So, for instance, this is an AV installation by Ryoji Ikeda, which was on recently at 180th Strand. In this kind of scenario, you're actually inviting the audience to be part of the artistic experience, where you've got visuals that are literally being projected onto the audience and audio being delivered from all around. So if you see that my project, while it's audio based, is also being informed by influences such as that. So my immersive journey began in 2019, sort of by a lucky accident. So I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to play a show at Abbey Road Studios, where I was at a kind of an innovation hackathon event. And I was one of the artists that was playing there. And that's where I actually met the L-Acoustics team for the first time. So L-Acoustics have a system called ELISA, the ELISA software, which is not actually so dissimilar when you open it up to the Dolby Atmos renderer. Effectively, as Mike Lee was talking about earlier, it's an object-based mixing solution. So what happened was L-Acoustics had a multi-speaker system at Abbey Road, and they invited me to remix my set in a few days in the run-up to be for immersive sound. And with the support of their engineers, and this is working out of their studio in Highgate, I was able to complete that. So I actually found the software is a little challenging to start with, because as a producer, you're trying to think in a slightly different way. You're moving from the sort of channel production through to creating sound objects and thinking, well, which sounds need to be separated in order for me to position them spatially around the hall. But I got kind of the hang of that and was able to reprogram the short set quite quickly. And at this point, Elisa was still, I could only really monitor it in a live studio. So as you can see here, I had to have monitors all around in order to do that. In fact, the following year, with the next release of Studio, it introduced binaural monitoring. So, you know, a producer like me who's just got a very simple setup at home can also monitor through just my headphones. So that was a fairly successful experiment. For me, as an artist, I was really excited by the additional palette of opportunities to deliver sound to an audience. And this is at the end of 2019, so I was quite excited about immersive experience, but then obviously we went into 2020, we went into lockdown. So a lot of my energy then got focused into the visual side and live streaming, and also incorporating things like mixed reality into what I did. However, come 2021, the world started opening up again. There was possibilities for live, which is always really my first love, is to make that connection with an audience. And I was very keen to sort of stage what I saw as the vision of an immersive experience, which should incorporate immersive sound. So I was lucky enough to receive an Arts Council grant to put on just a small show in which I effectively dry hired an art gallery, which is a Copeland gallery down in Peckham. And into that, installed various elements. So I worked with visuals. I also programmed the light show. All of this coming out of my Ableton set. So all the programming I do, whether it's for immersive, the lighting, etc., can be done through automation through Ableton. And we played a couple of dates, sort of running into 2021 Christmas, which, as everyone remembers, COVID was beginning to take over again. So it was quite a challenge. But at the same time, we had great and positive feedback from all the people who made it down to the event. And I was really excited by the possibilities of bringing all of those elements together. And for the first time, I was also able to start making the lighting work in conjunction with the audio, which then gives this illusion of something additional happening for the audience. So following that and positive feedback, over the next year, I did a few more experiments. I've also used the ELISA software to drive non-acoustic setup. So for instance, at Eclectic Art Lab, where they have a bespoke setup, which is both horizontal planes. This was with 12 speakers, but also elevation planes. So beginning to understand how I could elevate sound as well as play it around the audience. Eventually it sort of culminated in the opportunity to play at Earth. So Earth in Hackney is a 700 capacity venue. It has a 17.1.8 speaker system. So what you've effectively got here is 5 quite powerful arrays at the front of the venue. You have 4 speakers on either side, 4 speakers at the back, and 8 overheads. So really, really quite exciting for an artist to be able to produce and deploy sound for that kind of environment. Again, it was another exponential learning curve from Copeland Gallery, where I could be fairly democratic, I guess, with the sound, because we get equally powered speakers around quite a small audience. Here, I had to start thinking, you have to sort of, it's almost like a hybrid between how you might mix for a stereo frontal system that's kind of been glued together with more immersive elements running around the venue. And as mentioned, all kind of run through my Ableton setup. What I'm going to show you next is just a 1-minute overview of what that show looks like. And while unfortunately I can't give you an immersive experience of the sound, you can kind of catch glimpses of how the lights are mounted near the speakers and a little bit on my setup, which I'll then talk a little bit about afterwards. and just a little bit about how that sort of show is probably a suitable show for an artist looking to do immersive. So what was happening during that performance is I had probably spent some time before the performance pre-programming it in the ELISA object-based mixing software. That's what you can see here. But as you can see, this is actually in the front of house, whereas my setup is on the stage. So I program it in Ableton Live. There are then a variety of ELISA plugins that sit on each of the tracks, which are telling the stem that's effectively placed on that track where I've pre-programmed where that sound needs to come from, whether it's static. I can also draw automation into Ableton. So I can say, okay, I definitely want my kicks to remain static and they need to be coming from fairly powerful speakers at the front, but maybe some synth sounds or some effect sounds, I can kind of spin those slowly around the audience, etc. So as an artist, I've got some flexibility to sort of play with the sound around the audience. And what's happening is there's actually an additional Ethernet connection coming from my setup over to front of house in order to run this file and effectively tell the system where the sound should be placed. So very briefly, I've just sort of tried to summarise for me what the opportunities and challenges are as I see them, as I come to them. So the first instance, as I've just mentioned, is really flexible sound control. So if I want to do something that's more like an art installation, I can place sounds where I like around the audience. I can surprise people with bringing sort of sounds at different areas. I can also coordinate those with light display. But then when I move to beat-driven tracks, I can then pull that back into a more of sort of extended stereo sort of frontal arrangement. It has excellent sound coverage. So having also, I have to be modular because not everywhere has immersive sound. So when I've played this out in different venues, it's really clear in different venues. There's great sound in certain areas, lots of great sound in other areas. In immersive venues, you get fantastic sound coverage across the whole. Quite a heightened audience experience. And this is a really subtle one, and it's difficult for me to say. I know that I've got the most compliments on the sound from the immersive shows that I've played. Sometimes I wondered if it's psychological, that people know that they're coming to an immersive experience, so they're kind of looking out for the sound. But definitely, as you can see, this was a seated performance, and about a couple hundred people actually came to the front to start dancing, and it's not inspired that in previous venues, so it really feels like people felt the sound inside them and throughout the venue. It really felt like a special experience. Accessible programming and binaural monitoring. So again, I wouldn't even call myself highly technical, but it was fairly easy for me to pick up this. As I said, it's the ELISA software, from what I've seen of the Dolby Atmos renderer, it's relatively similar in the way they work, and they are accessible. There's also more tools coming out for producers like Envelope, which is a spatial sound system, which a lot of people can integrate into Ableton, which is a Max for Live device. So it's going to be hugely accessible for everyone who wants to come into immersive programming in the future. Many more venues are investing in spatial sound systems. They seem to be popping up all over the place. For me, it's great because it creates a vacuum of content for them. They really want to show off their sound system, so they definitely want immersive-ready artists. So it's a great opportunity for me. And then there's an extension to virtual reality and installations. So I'm currently working with L Acoustics and a tech company in Bristol to produce a metaverse concert where we will be integrating spatial sound. And as we know, there's a lot to be explored in metaverse. It's a little bit like immersive. We don't quite know what all the answers are or how that will be used in the future. But it's an interesting means to explore. And again, with the metaverse, you can say sort of play with the physics of time and physics. So you don't have maybe the issues of being in a big venue where you may have timing issues related to size and scope. And then finally, just in the terms of the challenges, while lots of venues are starting to put in immersive sound systems, they're definitely not everywhere. It's still quite seldom that you find them. And they are expensive to put in. They're expensive to hire, so I hired them in with an Arts Council assistance for Copeland Gallery. Lots of times, there's other times when I've played in a stereo venue when I would love to have brought in immersive sound, but it didn't make sense into the profitability of the show altogether. Again, I think as the market develops, there'll be more venues that are immersive ready. Maybe there'll be more systems which are cheap, fast to hire for DIY artists like myself. Programming, it does take a lot more input. You generally can't just turn up a venue and hit a button and say spatialize. You do have to put a lot of time and thought, so it is an extra time for the producer or engineer or whoever's working on the show to do that. I think one of the panelists was mentioning artist tools for mixing earlier in Dolby. I totally agree. It's still quite clunky to draw them in Ableton automation. There are lots of companies. There's a great one in Italy called Intorno Labs who are working on intuitive tools for artists to be able to draw in immersive and for that to then translate into the object orientation more simply, but they're not quite there. We're not quite there yet. The ability to manipulate in real time, I think again was mentioned by someone a little bit earlier. It would be great to think I can also be picking up sounds and sort of spinning them around the audience, and I know some artists are experimenting with that, but also if you're a performer that's already got a few things to concentrate on, that's another area where it just may not be possible to do that. So that's why all the stuff that I do is pre-automated. A little bit of a consideration for the size of the venue. As I mentioned, as you start to get to bigger venues, you start to have to think about the physics of the space in a slightly different way. If you've got something that's very stereoized and you're sending sort of a sound over there and a sound over there on the side speakers, it might be experienced very differently from people who are sort of hard left and hard on the right as well. So at that point, spatial isn't as the same as maybe working in more like an art installation space. And then finally, I think really importantly is communication across formats. So obviously I'm using Elisa and L-Acoustics at the moment, and I've come into that just because I was coming at it from a live perspective. I've very kindly, the guys from Dolby have talked me through their studio and had a look around the Dolby renderer. So, but there's a point where I was about to release an album in September, and I was like, where's the button? It goes from this format, because I don't really want to program it twice. If possible, I'd like, maybe it has to be programmed twice because it's different end use cases, but ideally there needs to be some sort of form of communication between those different platforms. And obviously those are not the only two. There's also D&B Soundscape, there's Sony 360, I think someone mentioned earlier. So I'm really interested to see how that area develops in terms of whether there is or isn't communication across different formats, because it may be that I choose to release in Atmos, but then play live in Elisa Acoustics just for whatever practical reasons there may be. So yeah, so that's just the quick summary of my immersive as I've seen it. Thank you very much.
Oh, what inspiration! Absolute inspiration. You were inspiring back then, back in the day. Even more so now. Thank you, Helena. Helena's now going to be part of a panel led by Andy Kerr, and yeah, it feels like the future, doesn't it? It's all going to be about the future of immersive. Andy Kerr, please take the stage and the panel. Thank you.
Hi everybody, so we're going to do the same things we did before. First and foremost, we introduce ourselves. I'm sure you recognise some of the people here anyway. So as Helena said, I'm the guy from Bowers & Wilkins, Andy Kerr, the possessor of the unfeasibly long job title. Don't worry, I don't get paid by the character. The simple thing of why I'm here, we are obviously involved in producing loudspeakers for recording studios. I think this was already mentioned earlier on in Rasika's presentation. What we also do is a whole series of different other types of audio system as well, including wireless speakers, headphones, and as was mentioned, we do automotive audio too. So we've got a lot of vested interest in this, but that's enough about me. I'm going to hand across to the rest of the guys.
Hi, my name's Bernard Butler. What am I up to? I'm an artist up there. Probably the best all-round thing, as pretentious as it is. I produce records, I perform, I'm a songwriter, I'll mix for you, I'll play the tambourine, I'll clap my hands, and do whatever. I mean, I've been, for 30 years, been involved in sort of every sort of aspect of making sound, and I wouldn't really pigeonhole any particular one. So it's really fascinating being part of this panel and looking down on these people and thinking, oh, right, hi everyone. Yeah, loads of different people. So thanks for having me.
Hello everybody, I'm Glenn. I make a lot of noise and play video games. No, seriously, I'm a composer, music producer. I work in-house at PlayStation, making music for their video games. I also make music as an artist and work with various artists producing. Recently got into Immersive in a very big way, and yeah, many thanks to Metropolis and BPI for inviting me.
Hi everybody, I'm Michael Needus. I work for Diva Music Group. I've worked there for 25 years out of a 40-year career. So yeah, I started when I was about 5 years old. I started at Polydor in '82, and when I left in '87, I worked for a couple of independent catalogue marketing companies, where I then found out that the majors don't own or retain the rights to everything. And even had a few years at Pioneer Laserdisc, where the audio-visual experience was just something absolutely phenomenal at the start of the '90s.
So I've already been introduced, but Helena Ryan, electronic music producer and live AV artist specialising in immersive experiences.
Hi, I'm Dan Macta from Cobuzz. I also wanted to thank BPI, Metropolis, and Andy from Bowers & Wilkins for inviting me over from New York. And Cobuzz is a small French company offering music streaming and download. Not that revolutionary. We were the first to offer high-res 24-bit music streaming, really focused on the high-end audiophile crowd, although in recent years we've really been making a push to broaden our audience as the appreciation for audio quality and kind of an alternative approach that we take has been paying off.
Thanks, Dan. All right, so look, let's get started.